Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. It is Wednesday, but we will be joined by one of the regular contributors on a Wednesday in John Hughes, but not Kevin Graham. I would have enjoyed Kevin's take on last night's game, John. He has a very blunt view of the Champions League and Celtic's performances in it, but he is sunning himself somewhere on the globe, somewhere on the planet. And it's yourself and I. You were at the game. Give me just a brief overview of last night for you, the experience of that, the hopes getting built up, then shattered again. How was it for you last night?
The first 74 minutes were excellent, but in terms of the build-up to everything, it's just, build-up to Champions League games. It's always exciting. We had someone very generously sorted out tickets for us, so a kind man, so he is. So we had to meet people quite early, so we were in the ground very early, which was great. So just taking it all in, it was good. The atmosphere was pretty good. Certainly in the first half, it was great. It was quite tense. Second half, again, it was pretty tense and a bit more anxious. And then people started getting very annoyed when we lost the goal. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, it wasn't, I know this is always controversial to say this, but, when that second goal went in, it was 84 minutes and just there was floods of people just left.
Yeah.
Just walked out, which I don't get it myself, how much quicker you actually get into your car, Anyway, look, people can do what they like, and I'm not criticising other fans. I'm just saying it's an odd look for, a supporters group that claims to be amongst the best in the world. It's an odd look where a goal is scored with 5 minutes left in the game and a huge number of people just upped and left. So that wasn't great. But other than that, the game itself, obviously, we'll come to it. But in terms of atmosphere, I thought it was very good, and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed the night, apart from the result.
Yeah, last night after the game, John, Kevin McCluskey and I had been pretty positive, I've got to say, in the pre-match, even at half-time. We're very positive about the way things were going. But we have been in Europe on the match days this season. But after the game, I think there was an airy disappointment insofar as we didn't really focus on the game as such and what went wrong specifically. We spoke more about where we are in terms of our European performances and where we are going in Europe. And I think up until fairly recently, it was a real bugbear. I mentioned Kevin Graham tongue-in-cheek, but it was a real bugbear, the pair of us, from the earliest days of Acsom, where we were speaking about where are the club going? What is the aspiration in Europe, John? And the team that was built in the 60s and the 70s that gave us an aspiration, because prior to that there was no European football for Celtic, but since then we've always tried to maintain that level, and it's never going to be maintained. Ange spoke about that just the other week there. He'll never ever get to the lofty heights of Jockstein. However, the only reason we have a dream in Europe is because of that side in the 60s and the 70s. Mm-hmm. But then it's been kind of, slim pickings, really. I said last night about the UEFA Cup final. Great. Did we build on it? Probably not. And then we've had a few Champions League, last 16 adventures as well, which were fantastic. But we haven't been able to do it, since, really. And the frustration for us was the fact that the club never really spoke about what our aspiration was, John. And you get that sense that you're just happy to be at the party and take your cheque and go away. I don't think that's where we are now, though. I think Ange has given a different view on that, and the ambition is different.
Yeah, well, the issue is, as a supporter, it's the hope that kills you. Now, I said before the game I would be happy for a point. And I had people coming onto my Twitter and basically saying, "Oh no, we need 3 points to get second." And I was like, "Wait a minute, lads! Did you see the game last week? Because they had 5 in the net and they could have had 8. You just don't turn that around in a week, and nothing good has happened to us since the CCV come back, and then we lost McGregor and we lost Shota. So nothing good happened to our squad, and they were playing with a full squad. So." Again, it is the hope that kills you. I believed that we could take a point from that game, and I stand by that. We absolutely should have taken a point from that game. But as I said last week, the should have forum continues. All the things we should have done, the number of things we should have done, and the Shakhtar game previously, which I knew was going to come back to bite us. But there's so many things that we should have done. The number of chances we had last night, and which you've got to take. You have to take them at this level. But then, at the end of the day, Paul, you end up sort of punched out towards the end of the game. I did a comparative value of the squads just to see, because everyone was talking about how much the squads were worth. Between the first 11 and the subs, our squad's worth 64.57 million if you believe transfer market. Their squad is worth 326.52 million. We are less than 20% of the value of their squad. So what happens there is, and you see this sort of thing in rugby very often, it's a more physical game, but you see where teams are dominant, you can hold on, usually for 60 minutes, but they'll always get you in the last 20. You'll always lose it in the last quarter because of physicality. Will win that battle. Now, it's not quite the same, obviously, in football, but certainly with the way Ange has us playing, these guys are playing to the absolute peak of their physical abilities, and they are tiring. They are not as, again, for that sort of 326 million, you buy some of the most athletic specimens on the planet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So these guys, we have, a physicality deficit. Basically, they are just more athletic. They're just fitter. And there's, you don't just buy guys like that because, the notion that you can just build people up to be like that is not true in a lot of cases. You can build people up to a level, if you've ever met some of these guys, I mean, the sheer size of them, the sheer athleticism of them, they're scary, scary specimens. So, and we are not going to reach that peak level that they're at. So we have to extend ourselves. Yeah, we are bursting our gut for 60 minutes, in this case, 70 minutes, and holding our own just about, certainly in the first half, which I thought we were very good in. And then, the changes are made and then things go astray. Now, I've already had this conversation with a couple of people, and I'm sure you did last night, about the changes. My take on it is, regardless of why he's doing it, and regardless of, whether people were great when they came on or half poor when they came on, the outcome is the same frequently. The outcome is the same. The outcome is we go backwards, it kills momentum, it just doesn't work out for whatever the reasons are, sometimes different reasons, different days, but making those mass changes has not been working. It didn't work at the weekend. It didn't work last night. And regardless of what you think about the guys that come on, the outcome was the same. We should have lost at the weekend. We escaped there. And last night, we did lose. And I feel ultimately they're obviously a very good side. But, the outcome of those substitutions was unfortunate. Now, what you'll never know is if you leave on tiring players, the same goals could have been scored just as handy, so there is no crystal ball to tell us that. And obviously they've got the track man on all these guys so they can see how fatigued they are. They know exactly how fatigued they are. But look, in terms of us going forward, in terms of where we are just now and, where we want to be, we're not really anywhere great just now in Europe. We are just effectively starting out. We haven't been in the Champions League for 5 years. And I was at some of those games as well, and they were Anderlecht in particular. I think it was absolutely dreadful. So, in terms of why we have European aspirations, we all know that, we had a history in Europe. But essentially, we had a history in Europe until the money started coming into the game from the TV deals. And since then, we've really had no history to speak of. We had the run in 2003. We've had a couple of individual magnificent victories, but, no real, run to speak of. Certainly none consistently, none for more than one season. So, if you can trust that Ange won't leave, then you can trust in what he's trying to do. Mm-hmm. And you really, I think, have to trust in what he's trying to do and trust that he won't leave, because we have no other choice. I suppose you could argue that, you could do what Rangers did last year and sort of dig in and, wait for other people to make mistakes and, play the way that they play. That's fine, and that worked for them. But ultimately, I think that Ange is on the right path. I think we need to play football in a certain way in order to compete. And even if it's not a certain way, I don't want to watch football with, guys dug in for 90 minutes and hoping to get a jammy break or whatever it is. I just don't want to watch that game. I'd rather be proud of the way that we play. And I am proud of the way that we play, and I'm proud of the bravery of the players, because it is an incredibly difficult thing to do under pressure. I'm just ranting now, Paul, so but it is an incredibly difficult thing to do under pressure. And as Ange said last week, we need to be more brave. That's some ask. That is some ask when there's guys overwhelming you, and you're terrified because as soon as you give the ball away, they're going to be all over you, and how good they are. They're better than you. Do you know what I mean? So you're terrified to give the ball away. You do give the ball away, and all of a sudden it's a counter-attack and they're all over you. So I think it is a huge ask of the players, and to try and break that mentality of, we don't want to be under pressure all the time. That's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to believe in, because, if you believe what they were doing last week, if we consistently, we nearly lost 2 goals in the first 3 minutes. So, they were overwhelming us a fair bit. So to take that decision in the middle of the field or in defence or whatever, to make that sort of, percentage pass, it might not make it. It's a big ask, and you've got to do it under pressure, and you've got to make it a split-second decision. I think for the level of players that we have, Ange asks an awful lot of them. But the ones that can stick it, the ones that can improve, they will rise to the top. The others will fall away. We get rid of them. We bring in people who can cope, and that's how we progress. That's how you make progress. Mm-hmm. So, I'm hopeful that we can make progress in the coming season. I'm very, very disappointed that the chances of us having European football after Christmas are basically, very slim at this point, because I really, really wanted to see us in the Europa, not in the Champions League. I wanted to see how we would fare in the Europa against teams that are far more in line with our budget and our abilities. So I really wanted to see how we could go there. You never know, Real obviously, only scored an equaliser in the 90th minute last night, as I understand it. So, but the problem is now that there's a few in the, RB and Shakhtar really in the mix, so they're going to be going for it.
Yeah. We are due a result at the Bernabeu, though. I mean,
yeah, because that's how it works. That's how it works.
It's been a while, John. We're talking about the response to last night, the reaction to last night, and obviously you've given us yours as being at the game. And yeah, we always do get built up, and that's natural because of the atmosphere. I've got a lot of good comments coming in, which I'm going to share. I'm also want to look at the reaction of Ange himself after the game. I always enjoy watching the press conferences. Often after a football game or leading up to a game, these things can be really boring affairs, but with Ange Postecoglou, it's different. You kind of hang on his every word. You're trying to get an idea of what he's thinking about the performances. And last week, the reason we've got the strapline today is last week he spoke about a mentality, and then last night he touched on it again. And I'm going to have a look at some of his comments to see whether or not Ange thinks that, yeah, as well as improving on the players we have, improving on the recruitment to bring in better, he's also looking at a mentality aspect of many of these players. In fact, from the starting lineup, only one player had Champions League experience for Celtic prior to this season, and that was Joe Hart last season. And I think that speaks volumes. We'll contrast and compare between the two sides as well. But I'm bringing in some of these comments because Brown Warrior comes in to say on the YouTube channel, Tony Watt v Barcelona in front of 60,000 and the best team in Europe for decades, possibly ever. Maybe even the best team in the world at the time. Takes his chance with composure. Stop making excuses for them. Ange, stop making excuses for them, Ange. Watt had little experience at that point.
Well, just to add to that, sorry to interrupt, Paul, but Maeda, you have to say, I doubt he has the composure to write a short story about being composed. The man's as composed as the heart of the sun. He's as cool as the heart of the sun, should I say. Again, you can't disagree with the sentiment there in terms of the number of chances that we're missing. So...
I get what Brown Warrior says. There are moments where everybody becomes a hero. It's time for heroes. It's time for them to stand up. And I totally get that. I guess what I'm trying to do, and it's not because I feel that I need to offset any negativity that I've seen on social media and from cheap hacks in the media, which we'll come to, but I honestly do believe in what Ange is doing. I think that there are aspirations, and I don't think we are at a stage that we can be. Now, I'm not going to say we're going to become that club, John, that returns back to the glory days, the golden age of the 60s and 70s when it comes to Europe. But we are underachieving, is what I'm trying to get my head round. And where are we? Where do we sit? Well, we should certainly, as you said there, be in the Europa League after Christmas. There's certainly no certainty to that. I'm going to have a look at some of the comments coming in from Ange last night. So he's disappointed for the supporters. It's great that he mentions the fans. I know Jota has in recent times as well. Disappointed for the players. But he maintains that it was the missed chances that cost us. Now, we could go on about all 4 games, John, and we could talk about the what-ifs of all 4 games, because we have had those moments, right back to the Real Madrid with McGregor hitting a post, going in at nothing each, Maeda getting that chance, lacking composure, as you said. And we could go through every one of the 4 games, and there are what-if moments, but it's difficult to sell that idea after a 2-0 defeat, after your Champions League dream is in tatters. But what I found interesting, John, right, after speaking about mentality last week, he spoke about the stresses and the anxieties of the players at this level. And I found that interesting, because what I'm thinking to myself is, right, is he looking at that squad, just like what I've said there, not one of them had kicked a ball in the Champions League other than Joe Hart, who started for Celtic last night. And he's maybe looking at the RB Leipzig squad and saying, well, in terms of the age, John, very, very similar average age of 2 sides. We're both just under 25 years of age. But when you look at the experience at Champions League level, we've got a total of 81 caps to their 171. How much weight do you put on that? The fact that, it's our maiden voyage in this tournament almost, and given us 2 or 3 seasons down the line, even the same group of players would do better. Do you buy into that?
Well, absolutely. If you don't buy into that, you're assuming that the players are all sociopaths. Who just, turn up, don't feel a thing, and just, crack on with doing their job. They're human beings, and, they're very well aware of what stage they're on. They're well aware. You think they haven't looked to see who they're playing against. You think they haven't checked the transfer values, or looked at these guys' histories. They know who they're up against. So, of course they're stressed, and of course they're anxious. And it is the ability to deal with that, and that ability comes with experience. Mm-hmm. Because you're always stressed or anxious when you're doing things for the first time. Do you know what I mean? Or they said, I was stressed about doing this podcast. Do you know what I mean? So, and there wasn't 60,000 people roaring at me, either. So, it's, of course you're stressed and anxious. Now, usually, experience of certain environments will change that. So you have to, but what we have to do is we have to be good enough to make sure that we're still playing in those environments.
Yeah.
And again, there's no advantage to us to come in here, being in the Champions League and getting punted out and have no European football, because that is an ever decreasing circle, because what that will mean is less players will want to come. Mm-hmm. Because it's great being in the Champions League, but it means you're getting like 4 games in Europe or 6 games in Europe every year, and that's it. and your season's over by Christmas. So, it makes a huge difference, obviously. These are young men who need to compose themselves, and they know they're outmatched. They know that every game they're playing here, they have to play at the peak or the pinnacle of their abilities. And that is stressful. That is a difficult thing to do. I'm not making excuses for them. I don't think we need to make excuses for them. I don't think we're good enough at this level at the moment. We're not making excuses. As it stands, we're not good enough. So, at the end of the day, there's no point in... I rewatched the game this morning, emotion-free, as it were. And there were a lot of good performances, and some of the people that were getting absolutely battered on, Twitter when I was on my way home last night, you're just, you're thinking, he didn't play that badly. There was a lot of good performances right up until the substitutions, then things changed. And that was maybe just people settling in or whatever, but, Haksabanovic going off, unless he was, on oxygen, I don't think he should have been off. He was probably the best player for a good chunk of that game, certainly our best player. I see people saying O'Reilly didn't play well in that holding role, McGregor's role. Certainly in the first half, he did. He played really, really well. And the second half, it was a slightly different game. But they come out. You've got to factor the other team into this.
Yeah.
In the first half, it looked to me as if they were playing for a draw. In the first half, it looked to me as if they weren't really, they weren't at it hammer and tongs. They were just going through the motions. And obviously, the manager thought the same thing and went through them at half time. Because when they came out in the second half, it was a different kettle of fish. So, at the point that we're starting to fade slightly, they're obviously turning things up a bit because they think they can take the points. But, look, at the end of the day, we don't need to make excuses. The results are there. We haven't been good enough. We should have done all of these things, which we haven't done. It's unfortunate that none of our strikers are currently really on particularly good form. We've had some unfortunate injuries, and the timing of the whole team's form, hasn't been great. But there were some great performances there. If you look at CCV and Jens, I thought the last time I saw it, when Jens played with Welsh, I thought Welsh was a better player.
Yes.
And in fact, he was the better player. There's no question. I thought Jens was losing the ball all over the show. The man looked like he was born to play in the Champions League last night. Alongside CCV, who was phenomenal. And I look back at the goals as well. And again, the goals wasn't because of the central defence. The goals was essentially midfielders failing to track their runners. In one case, O'Reilly and Turnbull. O'Reilly is really blowing at that point, to be fair. It's right at the end of the game, he's really blowing. And Turnbull's just not very quick, and he just didn't track the boy. And again, similar sort of situation for the first one, for the one that Werner scores, and he just runs through a crowd of our players. They're all there, they're all standing there, they just didn't track the run. So, there's lots of, as you say, ands, ifs, buts. The reality is you must take those chances. If you don't take those chances, what that means is you're not good enough at this level as it stands. You have to take them. So, we're not good enough at this level, and as Ange said himself, I believe, after the game, that's a conundrum that teams spend hundreds of millions trying to solve. So if you want a guy who's not Kyogo or Maeda, you want guys who are super composed, never flustered, all of that, incredibly athletic, unbelievably precise, and, they score 95% of their chances. That guy's going to cost you 100 million, so it's not our guys. We have to be better. But to be fair, if that was Kyogo of last year, he would have scored. You would have
fancied him to score, because you mentioned there about the form and everything coming together almost as a perfect storm at times can work in your favour or the opposite. And with the injuries, the form, the fact that we don't have that goal-scoring striker at the moment. All of these things are feeding into it. I find it incredible, actually. I never seen any of the flack, perhaps, that O'Reilly was getting last night, because after the game, we do the audio uploads and away home after that. So I never seen that. But I'm going to run into some of the stats of the game just after we finish with this reaction, because I mentioned earlier about cheap hacks having a dig at Celtic. Now, I think that the reason I'm bringing it up is it isn't just last night. It's almost as if in recent times Celtic have been fair game. This will lead me on to the Green Brigade in a wee second here and the great work that they did. But almost like Celtic have been fair game, John, because of some protests at our games and the way that the reaction has been in some corners of the media by people who, you know, I'm not even going to name them. You all know who they are. I'm not even going to give them any kind of airtime. But then last night we get some guy on a channel that you would never tune into, but that, you know, it comes up on your Twitter feed because they know they're going to get a reaction. It's a shock jock tactic, John. But to call Celtic an embarrassment, this fella knows nothing about Celtic. He knows nothing about Scottish football. It's ill-informed. He doesn't understand that we're in a scenario at the moment where Ange is taking us into our first campaign at this level, and we're still building a team. And for him to come along and say we're an embarrassment, I do get a sense that that's a knock-on effect, not only the last night's result, but all of the flack that we got recently that no one really stood up to in terms of the club. It's almost as if Celtic are fair game, we can say what we like about you. And I've come close sometimes to going toe-to-toe with some of these clowns, but they probably wouldn't even respond to you, they would just block you. But what do you make of that kind of tactic after the game? And by the way, there's plenty in our own media who are no better when it comes to Celtic.
Yeah. Well, you know, what is it they say? Never argue with an idiot. They just drag you down to their level. You know, and you know, you can't agree with them because then you just both be wrong. So, you know, that those kind of tactics, I've seen a lot more of it recently. You know, because I scan a lot more of Celtic media now, or the media in general relating to Celtic. You know, because I am doing the podcast, so you're looking at the news aggregators like News Now and stuff like that for all the stories, and they all have the same approach. It's like one wee nugget of information spun 10 different ways, you know, and then as soon as there is anything actually of interest that they could say, I mean, you're saying something like an embarrassment. I mean, I mean, honestly, you know, I'm trying, you know, again, I want to keep my language civil, so, you know, that's a outrageous comment, an absolute outrageous comment. But I mean, I saw yesterday, I tweeted there was the banner. What was it? The Green Brigade had against hunger in the Crown, and someone had you know, put that up. You know, banner at Celtic Park. You know, with the implication that there was something wrong with that. There's something wrong with it, is there? You know, it's just like, what are you talking about? You know, they just know nothing about. They know nothing about the history. They don't appreciate any of what the fans are about. They don't know anything about the club at all. They're not interested in knowing something about the club. It's basically, let's find something that we can dig into people about, and they will. See, the problem is they will get a reaction, because if I'd seen what you just said that you saw, I would have reacted to that. You know, and so, you know, they make mugs of us that way because they do tap into your emotions, you know, and try and get you really annoyed. And then, you know, sometimes you do get really annoyed and you do react, and you know, a lot of people do. So it gets them exactly what they want. You know, that's the most frustrating thing about it. You know, and as for the club, you know, fighting the corner, you know, again, in terms of media relations, perhaps there is something that the club could do to say, you know, our comms team could maybe say to people, you know, look, what's that about, you know, and challenge them there. But, you know, again, what you're going to do is stop them having access. Do what Rangers do, charge them 25 grand for access. You know what I mean? It probably isn't a bad idea, to be fair.
See, the thing,
you know,
John, I watched that. I'm a big fan of Chris Sutton. I really do, not just because he's Celtic career, but I do rate him as a pundit. And he did I think it was a BT Sport show recently with is it Daniel Curry, and they're speaking to Ange Postecoglou. And you see Ange in a different light depending on who's facing him, don't you? I mean, you see him at the press conferences being quite serious, very serious actually, with a lot of the Scottish media. Not so much with the fan media. He opens up to Cy Ferry, for example, and I thought he was really good with Chris Sutton. And if I was a club, I'd be putting him in front of Jason Cundy, and I'd be saying, all right, on you go. Explain to Ange Postecoglou why his team is an embarrassment, because he wouldn't last 5 seconds with Ange.
No.
You know, in front of him.
No, Ange is a tremendous performer. But, you know, as you say, you know, I love watching Ange because I'm on his side. I wouldn't want to be on the opposite side. Do you know what I mean? Just that look he would give you, and the mate, the way he says, the inflection on mate, you know, whether he means it or whether he's trying to say exactly the opposite. You know, it's great to watch. But look, these people are clowns. They're professional clowns. They have to, you know, get a reaction in order to do their job. Otherwise, they don't get the figures. Otherwise, don't they? I mean, you know, I'm sure he would have said the same thing about loads of other clubs as well if he thought he could get a reaction. It's just because our support, you know, actually care about the club and therefore get really upset about stuff like that. So they're taking advantage of how much we care about it. But, you know, look, that's our job. I suppose the only thing really we can do is try and tune them out. But it can be very difficult sometimes. I mean, as you say, it comes up on your timeline and unless you're not on social media at all, it's very difficult to tune out some of this nonsense and not be taken in by it. But look, the thing about it is, if you are taken in by it, you can be at it all day. It can take up your whole day. It can affect your mood. You know what I mean? It can actually change your mood, you know, and you need, if that's what you're finding, you need to step away from it for a while and just, you know, not get too involved in it, because, you know, you start out the day feeling great, you know, and before you've left to go to work, you've read 5 things and you're raging.
I know. You know? And then at the end of the day, you look at your to-do list and think, damn, didn't get that done. But I mean, even if you go back to 1965 when Celtic launched the Celtic View, I know times have changed now, John, and obviously there was no need for a physical weekly news magazine. But at the time there was, and a big reason and a big part of that, I've had the privilege of speaking to Jack McGinn, who launched it, John McGinn's granddad, of course, and he was talking about not controlling the narrative as such, John. I know it later became known as Pravda, I get all that, and it wasn't controlling the narrative insofar as shutting up the supporters. It was more against, you know, the situation we were in with the press, where you know they couldn't print what they liked, especially when Jock Stein came in, but we could provide what they said was the truth at that time. And obviously, as time went on, once it gets into the 1990s, and there are fake letters getting sent in by board members just to try and say, oh, the board are doing a fantastic job. I used to love how Not Review just ripped them to pieces by that stage. But yeah, that was the whole reason. So it's always existed. And you know, I would like to see some form. I guess sometimes, John, the art of social media shithousery can come into place at a later date when we can come back to these conversations when Celtic aren't an embarrassment, and we can come back to them. Now, I mentioned the Green Brigade, and I think we've got to mention the Green Brigade because obviously the club were fined. I think it was 19 grand on 2 different issues in relation to pyrotechnics and a banner, which it would appear, you know, you're not allowed to view your opinion of certain matters, John, but you will be forced to cheer for a minute or whatever they tell you to do with regards to the same matters. It's an interesting situation. But the Green Brigade came out fighting, as they did, in relation to the fine over the Palestinian display, and very quickly raised 26 grand for food banks. Now, it's not something that we can ignore. We've got to broadcast that out there and say, look, this is the work that these guys do. You can't call our club an embarrassment and a disgrace and everything else we've been called when the good work is time and time again, John, ignored. So we've got to broadcast that. Brilliant bit of work by the Green Brigade.
Yeah, no, it was, and they did that the last time as well, didn't they? Raised, I think, 170 odd grand, Palestinian causes. But I mean, myself and Kev had this discussion at length a few weeks ago, and you know, my point was just the same. If you're saying there's no politics, then there should be no politics. End of, right? Not subjective, not decided by a committee of what's appropriate at UEFA. Because it's completely subjective. They have no idea, what's behind that. And, you might find it offensive, but if you don't want to be offended, don't go to football, because there'll be people standing around you shouting stuff that's going to offend you rightly. So the notion that they can just subjectively determine what is and isn't appropriate at a football game is a nonsense. And I noticed, actually, they were careful to say it wasn't fit material for a football game, instead of saying, it was political. They didn't mention political, and they didn't do that now because they've broken that now, because they can't do it anymore, because they made us all wave Ukrainian flags, and and there was, that was all fine and dandy, but yeah, you couldn't say anything about Palestine, you can't say anything about the Crown, and being anti-monarchist, and who are the monarchists at UEFA? I'd love to know. I don't know how many monarchies there still are around. How is it not appropriate? You could say you don't like. I don't appreciate the language, but are we now going to start banning banners based on the language that's on them?
Because there's exactly.
I don't know. It's a whole can of worms. They have opened a can of worms here. And once you get delving into it, it's just like, well, you can't stand that argument up. You can't stand by that. So that's fine. They can hand out the fine. And we end up having to pay. It's a bit like a parking ticket. But if you went to court, they cannot stand those arguments up. There is no logic behind them. It is just purely subjective, and in my view, absolutely disgraceful. And if you want to talk about embarrassments, there'd be one of them. Now, the Green Brigade have, a lot of people don't like them. I think they've done tremendous work. I think they do tremendous work in the stadium. There obviously comes with issues, like I knew we'd get fined for the pyro, straight away. You've got to take that in the chin. That's dangerous, and I know people like it, but it is dangerous, and you shouldn't be doing it in the stadium. So you take that in the chin. But in terms of free speech, in terms of banners, who at UEFA is now the morality police that's telling us what we can and can't say at a game? What nonsense is this? It's not a political situation. It's not, it's pure nonsense. And anyway, that's something I think the club should appeal, because they will not be able to stand that argument up.
There comes a time, John, where, like I say, you've got people in the media coming out and saying whatever they please about Celtic Football Club and our supporters. And then obviously UEFA fine us. But there comes a point where I do think, stand up for the fans here. To be honest, and I could be wrong, but when I seen the banner last night, although I'm paraphrasing a wee bit, I thought about the Fields Athenry lyrics against the famine and the crown. That's what I instantly, because I think it was the hunger and the crown, but against the famine and the crown is what I thought about. And I think to myself, well, can you not even display that lyric on a banner now? Because it's going to offend somebody at UEFA. I find it ridiculous, but the Green Brigade stood up, and I think what they've done has been fabulous.
That's interesting, Paul, because you think about it that way. That's what everyone thought. As soon as you saw that, they have paraphrased that lyric. That's what they've done. That song is sung in rugby stadiums all around the world. The Fields Athenry, everywhere the Irish go, or Irish teams go, they're singing that song. So, are we saying that's now not appropriate? Are we saying that they're going to get fined for doing that? Why are we getting fined for doing it? In what way? Is the Fields of Athenry now a banned song? So, again, it's nonsense. Now, I know that's not the one that they banned us, they fined us for, but it's the same principle.
Yeah.
It's the same principle. What isn't appropriate should not be subject to some morality police at UEFA. There are either definite rules or there aren't.
Remember the furore when wee Fergus wasn't long at the club around the Fields Athenry, and certain people in the media. I'll actually need to dig this out, because I do remember some reports around banning that song at Celtic Park. And McCann came out swinging, and he printed the lyrics in the Celtic View, and everybody got a wee history lesson. It was tremendous, and that sometimes is what you're looking for from the club, isn't it? Just to say, no, actually, we support our fans on this one.
No, that would be great. That would be great, and they should do that. I think they're loath to do that because they, in this, because of everything that we just discussed about, the shock jocks and the people manipulating the media. So what they're trying to do there is, if the club reacted to it in any way, then they would start listing off, everything that the Green Brigade had ever done that was offensive and say this is what the club supports. So the club has to tread a very fine line there. They want the Green Brigade for the colour and the noise and the passion. They don't want the hassle. So they're sort of conflicted about whether, they want them because of everything that they do. They don't want anything to do with anything controversial because they're still, after all, a PLC, and they're not in the business of, really coming out and supporting us. But that's what makes it certainly during the times of, the end of Neil Lennon and stuff like that, it was that sort of perceived lack of passion, lack of care, the fact the treatment of it purely as a business that enraged people. People were just furious, and myself included. I'm saying people, I was, so, but you're just furious because it feels like it's a bit like, the way things are with the governments and so on just now, in the situation we're in, cost of living crisis, all the rest of it. You've got no say. It feels like your voice just doesn't matter. It feels like you're just screaming into the void. And sometimes that's what it can feel like, being owned essentially by a PLC, because it is a faceless corporate. There are some very good people in there, but it is not their job, as they see it, to get involved in standing up. Now, Fergus was different because Fergus was the owner. You know what I mean? So, he could stand up and say, he owned the business, so he was perfectly entitled and perfectly right to stand up and say what he wanted. But again, we've got a board of directors who are answerable to shareholders, and if the shareholders objected to something they said, then they'd be in a lot of trouble. It's, it is quite soulless when you think about it like that. So, unless the board appoint someone to liaise with the media, and I don't just mean liaise with them, I mean fight our corner. I mean someone who's perhaps whose remit is more than just facilitate guys to write a lot of nonsense about us, whose remit might be, no, when someone says something, get tore into them, and release something on social media that counteracts it. You don't need to get involved in big rammies, but just a very black and white statement that says everything this man said was a load of nonsense. Thank you very much, Celtic Football Club, PLC, so just leave it at that. But, I would love to see something like that happen. I would love to see someone being put in place there whose job is to fight the corner, because it can't be Ange. No. It's not his job to be patrolling social media and all this content. He probably doesn't look at half it, or 90% of it. So it's not his job to do that. But when he's confronted by it, he smacks it down. But this stuff is insidious. This stuff is out in the background. People constantly trying to undermine the club, and especially after what happened with, recently about the older lady that died at 96 from natural causes in her favourite castle. So that was that sort of thing is unfortunate, but again, it would be great to see us fighting a corner, but unless they appoint someone to do it, there's nobody in an existing position like Michael Nicholson or Ange or anyone else who's going to do that. So the board would have to decide that, and I think that's very unlikely, and it is very frustrating. So another frustration, much like our form at the moment.
It is, John. But talking about the form, I want to come back to something you mentioned there, which surprised me a wee bit, about some people being unhappy with Matt O'Reilly. I'm going to come to some of the performances last night. Jake thinks it's hard to take any comfort, and look how far the club has come. Another awful European campaign, and we'll never get an easier Champions League group. Massive failure by the club. A massive failure. What else could have been done would be my question there, because I think that in terms of the recruitment over the last 18 months since Ange has come in, I think the recruitment's been excellent. I think going into the pre-season there, John, time and time again on this broadcast, we spoke about the unlikely nature of us getting Jota and Carter Vickers on permanent deals. We did it. We did. Yeah. They were the two marquee signings. We brought them in.
I respectfully completely disagree with that statement. First of all, and I know Kev takes this view as well. You take the view of Celtic over the sort of last 20 years. Well, that's not fair. You know, like Lawwell's not there anymore. It's a completely new manager, completely new set of players. You can't just, you know, it's not one homogenous blob that's to blame for everything. You know, that's just not the case. It's a new team that was put together last year. We were fortunate to win a league last year, given the circumstances that we found ourselves in at the start of the year. We did great work. The manager did great work, so did the players. And we won that league deservedly so, but we were fortunate because it could have been a lot worse if we didn't get the right man in. You know, if anything had gone slightly different, it could have been a catastrophic season to follow up what was another catastrophic season. So you have to take that on board. That's fine. But, you know, this year you're hoping to see more progress. So what I'm looking at in the league and things like that is, are we making progress there? Now, despite the fact where our form is at the moment, we are in fact much better off points-wise than we were this time in the league. I think that this time last year we'd lost 3 and drawn 1. You know, so we are in fact, you know, a better side from that point of view, despite the fact, you know. So I think it's only fair to compare apples with apples, right? So if we go into next season's Champions League as champions, as we undoubtedly will, there's some Rangers guys somewhere clipping that as well as right. Anyway, so there's but as we undoubtedly will, in my view, then we'll see then, because we need a better calibre of player, right? We've done a fantastic job to get very, you know, good players in to win us the Premiership, but at the end of the day, you know, you're talking about the very top of the game here. And as I just pointed out, massive failure by the club. All right, so I'll go and knock Michael Nicholson's door and ask him why he didn't spend £326 million, you know, like Leipzig have done, or, you know, have gathered up that value in their squad. Yeah, no, that's a massive failure. Oh, come on. Well, be realistic here. You know, and I know it is disappointing. I know the hope is the thing that gets you, as I said right at the start. But, you know, people like from last week saying, oh, we're going to win this game. I think we're going to win this game. Yes, look, with your supporters' hat on, you know, you want to say we win it. But there's no excitement in being pragmatic, but at least be realistic. You know, I was hoping that we would get a draw. I didn't think we would get one, but I was hoping we would get one. I believed we could if we played well, but I also knew we're not playing well. So, you know, am I surprised at the result? No, not at all. You know, because that's so for people to be raging. You know, you saw the game last week. What did you think was going to happen in the space of a week? You know, did we learn absolutely no lessons at all? So, look, we're going to go on and do much better. Ange is a great manager. We'll get better players in, hopefully, if the club do the right thing. But it's very much now, you know, with any value that we've built up in these guys, you know, if we're selling, you know, if we bought Haksabanovic for, you know, $1.5 million and he's now worth $5 million, you know, if you're selling guys like that, the next guy you buy cannot be a £1.5 million player. It has to be a £5 million player. So the way this is going to work is the only way it's going to be successful if the board finally bites a bullet and say we're not resetting to scratch every time we sell one of these guys. Yeah. You know, so that's where the future lies for us, and it's all in the hand of the board, you know, in my view, because realistically there is no other path forward for us at all. Now, as I say, I would have loved to see us in Europa, because that would have been a real test of where we're at, and that's where I'd love to have seen us. But you know, this isn't a test for us really at the moment, because they're just, you know, we're just not at this level. And the one thing he did say was that it was a very good, you know, it was a good group for us. That is true, you know, because especially with Shakhtar. But look at what's happened here, and this is what happens at this level. Shakhtar, you know, should be absolutely decimated. Shakhtar have been desperate. You know, they've lost all their first team players. There shouldn't be. You know, they're lucky if they'd be able to kick a ball between them. And, you know, they've been absolutely decimated. And look at what they've done. I know. You know, they've taken a point from Real. They've taken 3 from Leipzig. I mean, it's and they've got Marian Sved playing right wing. I know.
Listen, I'm going to keep going back to this weird result at the Bernabeu. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Yeah, so on the game then, the thing with me in relation to where I am with data and analysis and stats is I've always had an intrigue in it, John, because in the very early days of A Celtic State of Mind, when we were an audio-only podcast, we used to get Alan Morrison on as a special guest to make sense of everything that was going on, who was playing poorly and why, etc. And Kevin and I found it absolutely fascinating, to the point where Kevin invested in a whiteboard and now does wee graphs and all that himself. I'm not sure if they make much sense, but I'm now at the stage where I watch the game, like you say, as a fan, whilst trying to make sense of it. I often go back and watch it again once the emotion is removed, like you did today. And then I try and look at the statistics and the data and bring it all together so that you can have a view on the game. So someone who maybe remembers 3 or 4 moments that they were unhappy with Matt O'Reilly last night might come away from that game and say, he's had a bad game. I'm not criticising anybody. That is an observer's view. That's always been my view. He's played well, he's played badly. But the stats would argue that Matt O'Reilly, was the most effective player on the park for Celtic, both defensively and in an attacking sense, when we look at the quality of their contributions. So that's an interesting one for me, because that's the way I watched the game. I don't know, was that similar to you when you watched it back? Matt O'Reilly's defensive and attacking play was very effective.
Well, at the time, at the game, I thought he played well offensively. But on watching it back, he did a lot of defensive work, like really important defensive work. He made a couple of vital interceptions, made a couple of great tackles, broke up the play really, really well. So, it was really interesting, on watching it back, because obviously that's a controversial pick. That's a very controversial selection. For us to play that 3 in midfield, that is controversial, because then you've got people saying, well, what did we buy Abelgard for?
Yeah.
What is the point of Moyne, McCarthy? And, what is it, if that's the 3 that we're going to play. But actually, O'Reilly wasn't to blame, I don't think, for anything last night. I mean, again, it was very interesting watching his defensive contribution, which I didn't notice at the time. And offensively, I thought he was as good as he usually is. So, but again, these things are all relative. They are relative to the players that you're playing against. So, they're doing, our guys are, our best guy, won't be as good as their best guy. That's just the way it works. So I feel that, people see things obviously very differently. That's the whole point of these conversations. You get very, very different opinions, and it's why I go and watch it back, because you want to get some objectiveness into what you're going to say. Because when you're standing roaring and shouting, and you've decided the first guy that missed a ball is now your whipping boy for the rest of the game, and you're roaring abuse at him, so that, you want to go back so you can give a balanced view. And, O'Reilly, I think, is backed up with the stats, as you say, I think, Paul, isn't it?
And we've all got biases as well, John. So we look at certain players differently based on this perception that we've built over a period of time and the amount of times we've watched them playing. So that plays a massive part. But I've got to say, I did, in real time think that Matt O'Reilly had an excellent game. And when we're looking at the actual chances created, again, you were saying you were happy right up to a certain moment last night. We created more chances second time round than we did in the first game against Leipzig. We also reduced their chances second time round compared to the first game. So what it comes down to is the poor quality of our finishing. And I think you could see that. I mean, Kyogo's header, for me, we've seen him scoring goals like that without blinking. We've hit the post, we've hit the bar. The post, I thought, unlucky. Greg Taylor's got to score the rebound, though. So there's all these moments. One of the things that surprised me, and I'd need to go back and watch the game, is that after the substitutions, Moy's contribution was very positive as well. I'd need to look back on that. And it's not a player that I criticise that often. Hatate and Kyogo were pretty poor, and Maeda, apparently, was the worst of the bunch.
Yeah, well, funny enough, Maeda in the first half looked all right, but then I noticed a couple of things, and you're starting to look at the second half. He's got the ball, he's got time. He's on the left wing, he's through, he's got time to look up, he's got time to take a touch, and he just balloons one in the middle of nowhere. Don't know where it landed. It just terrible. But and again, that header he had in the first minute, right? He headed it over the bar. It was a low header. It was over the bar, but you were never going to get that. So don't put your head on it. Do you know what I mean? You've got to stop it, drag it back, or drag it through your legs, or whatever you have to do. But you're never going to get that. It's never going to be a header. You're falling backwards. It's behind you. What are you going to do? It's exactly what happened. Then it was just bad choices. I don't think he's playing well at all. I'm more annoyed about, but we've got replacements for Kyogo, for Maeda. I'm more concerned about Kyogo, to be fair. Now, if you want to take the positives, I think Haksabanovic has been a real positive the last couple of games. I think he needs to start every game from now on. I don't like him coming in for Jota, so I'm happy for him to play in that sort of 10 role, or at the top of, effectively, that 3 in the midfield. I think that 3 in the midfield will be more than good enough domestically. I don't think we need to be playing a defensive midfielder there domestically if we play our football the way we're supposed to be playing it. But the problem is, I mean, it's the oldest cliche in the world: goals change games, right? And there are so many times that we should have the ball in the back of the net, and it just changes the complete dynamic of the game.
Yeah.
It knocks the fight out of people. It puts them on the back foot. They're panicking. Depending on who it is, it makes such a huge difference. And if you can't get the ball in the net, and even domestically, we've been leaking a couple as well, so that's not great. But I don't think. If you looked at that defence last night, you wouldn't have thought they would have too much trouble domestically speaking. But again, it's not the defence. That was coming from, the midfield not tracking the runners. So it's a whole team thing. And I think that's basically a tiredness thing. You're getting into the last 20, and I just don't think we have the athletic capability of keeping this up, But if you remember the way we played at the sort of start of last season, we were pumping. We were 3-0 up at half time or 4-0 up at half time, and then we were terrible in the second half. Do you know what I mean? So
it's interesting you mention that. Kevin and I spoke after the game last night where we talked about the issues that we're now seeing in the Champions League, John, being domestic issues last season that we were able to iron out. And you look at, we've only got 6 games, and you're not going to iron it out in one campaign, but we're going to learn from that. It's going to galvanise us. Every individual's going to learn, but so is Ange. I mean, people going about the lack of experience in our team. This is Ange's 4th game in the Champions League. Marco Rose, 17 games. I mean, it's not massively more, but this is his first campaign. So he's learning about the whole dynamic of that as well. He's looking at players that ordinarily would have slotted chances away, and for some reason, and he's talking about anxieties and stresses, and he understands that. So I think that what we've tried our best to do here is not just tear it up and say we're never ever going to be a team that is not an embarrassment in Europe, to use some of the ridiculous language that we were seeing this morning. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time, John, and we're only 4 games into that. We really are looking at from a different perspective entirely. I think that we might look back on this campaign, going back to one of the previous comments, and say this was the one that got away. I think we might look at that in that kind of view and in that angle, but I'm sure there's much, much better to come as well. How do we get through? I was looking at this morning. So we need to beat Shakhtar at home, go and get that long-awaited result in the Bernabeu. I think it's been since 1967 since we've been victorious over there. And then we're praying that other results go our way as well. So, I mean, it's still doable, John. It's still doable.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, can we beat Shakhtar? Absolutely we can. I don't care what other results they've got. I mean, if you look at their team compared to us, this is no longer the same sort of discrepancy that we're talking about. I think we have the ability to beat them. We should have beat them in that last game. And now that has come back to bite us. We should have taken those points. And again, I'm saying should have. I know I'm aware I'm cycling back to that, but, I believe absolutely we can beat Shakhtar. Now, and I don't believe, I'm not hopeful like I was hopeful we'd get a point last night. I'm not hopeful. I believe we can beat them. In terms of Madrid, I think that's hopeful. To be honest with you, I'm not even sure what's worse. Would it be, the full Madrid side sort of at 80% not really giving a monkeys, or their reserves who are all trying to make a point? And all of whom, if you added up their value, are probably still worth 3 times what we're worth. So I'm not sure who you'd rather face. But it might well be the case that Madrid still, have to get a result to hammer it home. But, I don't know. I haven't even bothered checking what they're on 12 points or something at the moment. So I think it's pretty much done. But, I'm hoping they don't care. And with any luck domestically, they've got some really important game coming up just after we play them, and they're resting as many men as possible. But, if Shakhtar can take a point off them, why can't we take a point off them?
That's what I like to hear, John. Yep.
So, and we're better than Shakhtar. I've just said it, we're better than Shakhtar, so that means we're going to beat Madrid, technically speaking, if you go by last night's results.
I'll win in a draw. That's all we need, a win and a draw. Right, listen, there's a fairy tale about this club, never forget that. I've really enjoyed that, John. It's been tremendous sitting in Kevin Graham's chair for the last couple of weeks. Again, I think we'll be doing it next week. I think Kevin's still holidaying in deepest, sunniest Fife. I know. Must be getting paid well from Acsom, if the rumours are true. So thank you everybody for getting involved. Keep the chins up, and we will be back tomorrow at 12:30 with JP. All that's left for me to say once again, John Hughes, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.